We are here today with another guest author. This is JL Lycette. And Dr. Lycette, I can call you Jennifer. Is that correct?
Yes, please call me Jennifer.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Because I never know. I'm like, oh, doctor, because you earned that. Jennifer Lycette is a novelist, award-winning essayist, rural physician, wife, and mom. She has a degree in biochemistry from the University of San Francisco and attained her medical degree at the University of Washington. Mid-career, she discovered narrative medicine in her path back from physician burnout and has been writing ever since. She is an alumna of the 2019 Pitch Wars mentoring program. Her other published speculative fiction can be found in the anthology And If That Mockingbird Don't Sing, Parenting Stories Gone Speculative. The Algorithm Will See You Now is her first novel. Her second novel, the prequel, titled The Committee Will Kill You Now, will be out in November 2023. Jennifer, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
We're thrilled to have you. And one of the things I wanted to kind of just kick us off with is, so you're a doctor, right? Like a real doctor who cures people. How'd you get into writing?
Yeah, gosh. I would say, with a little bit joking, but not totally joking, as an act of desperation. It really was something I turned to, sort of like discovered within myself when I was going through burnout, and probably even before I knew I was burned out. I never thought of myself as really a creative, and I've realized through this journey that has only happened in my 40s that I do have a creative side. I just suppressed it for many, many years.
It's exciting to discover the power that creation can have in that kind of restorative or ameliorative part of our soul. I feel like if I am not creating something, whether it's, I was in board games for a while or playbooks for football or whatever, all the different little passions I've had over time, if I'm not being creative, I feel like I'm kind of wasting my time. Do you feel that way as well?
Yes, in some ways I do. And the other part of it I struggle with too is, I think because of my background in medicine, is this constant pressure I put on myself to be productive. So it's kind of like this, inner war I'm always having with myself. And a friend of mine, one time I was texting with, and she said to me very kindly, like, could you give yourself one day to not be productive? And I thought, oh, yes, I could do that, but it often is really hard.
In New York City, we have there's a chain of gyms called Mark Fisher Fitness, and they really cater to the Broadway crowd, where they just sort of, you're working out, but people are dressed as unicorns and throwing glitter everywhere. It's a huge, huge deal down there. But the owner, Mark Fisher, who was my first roommate in New York City, they asked him once about his productivity and how he does so much in his life, and he said, well, the amount of time I have to tell my story, that time is getting shorter and shorter and shorter. So I want to do as much as I can when I can. And so for me, who feels the same way, that, I had this pressure to be productive, I really didn't need to hear that from him.
What you said about creativity, it just reminded me, I just finished reading this book, and I might mess up the title, called The INFJ Writer. And
is that a Myers-Briggs reference?
yes,
yeah.
it is. And, I take that with a grain of salt, but I do relate to the INFJ, sorry, subtype. And a friend of mine recommended the book, and it was incredible how she wrote about how the act of writing or other creativity is really like nurturing for the soul. And it really was a side of myself I didn't know was missing for so long. And so even though there's this side of me that battles with writing, having to be productive, like, that book was very helpful to me to be like that, the act of creativity itself has value. So
I've always thought about it as two sides of that same coin. The one is this urgency to create something, and that sort of drumbeat within inside of you that requires that. But then on the flip side, it's the self-harm of actually doing the work. Like, it's really hard to do. And I'm like, why am I pushing myself to do this thing that no one wants me to do anyway, but I feel compelled to do it. And it's really hard and I don't enjoy it sometimes, but gosh darn it, I'm going to do it. So yeah, that's, I don't like that coin.
Yeah, I hear you. Like, what is that saying about like writers are the only people, like we assign ourselves homework and that we're the only ones that care about? Like, why do we do this?
Exactly. So I would like to introduce folks to your book, The Algorithm Will See You Now, which I think is a great title. I've got the blurb here. I'd like to read that into the record, so to speak. So here we go with the blurb to The Algorithm Will See You Now. Medical treatment determined by artificial intelligence could do more than make Hope Kestrel's career. It could revolutionize healthcare. What the Seattle surgeon doesn't know is that AI has a hidden fatal flaw, and the people covering it up will stop at nothing to dominate the world's healthcare and its profits. Soon, Hope is made the scapegoat for a patient's death, and only J.C. Stone, a gifted intern with a knack for computer science, is willing to help search for the truth. But her patient's death is only the tip of the conspiracy's iceberg. The director, Mara Maddox, is plotting a use for the AI far outside the ethical bounds of her physician's oath. A staggering plan capable of reducing human lives to their DNA code, redefining the concepts of sickness and health, and delivering the power of life and death decisions into the hands of those behind the AI. Even if the algorithm accidentally discards some who are treatable in order to make that happen. JL Lycette's powerful near-future thriller, The Algorithm Will See You Now, is perfect for fans of Blake Crouch and Rob Hart.
It draws you in, it gets you there. I think it hooks you. I mean, obviously the book's out there. That's fantastic. How did the blurb come about? Was that something that you were writing alongside it? Is it something that you wrote after the book was finished?
I would say a combination of both. So the publisher did have me write my own blurb for, the book is available other places too, but basically like what they call like the Amazon blurb. And so some of it is taken from, the infinite versions of the query letter I was sending for years before. And then I had feedback from writer friends and especially one who is an editor who's quite good at this kind of thing. So
now that's actually, I have a follow-up question to that because you said something about the Amazon blurb and my heart kind of sank. Are there different blurbs? Do you have different blurbs for different markets?
Oh gosh, I'm probably not the right person to answer that since this is my first book, but I would say going through a small publisher, my book is exclusive through Kindle for the ebook, which is basically when you publish an ebook, you have to decide if you're going to be exclusive with Kindle Unlimited or not. But because of that, I think the main platform, despite what we all might feel about Amazon, is through Amazon. And so I did feel like there was a bit more pressure for the blurb to be more commercial, which was kind of hard for me to do. Like, I would say like this blurb, and I did learn a lot from it because going back, I thought, well, maybe this is what a query blurb needs to be all along, is something like that you would consider like a commercial, like a commercial for your book, basically.
Yeah, we liken it to the importance of a trailer for a Hollywood movie, and that seems to be the way folks think about it, is that it, there's this concept of, I don't want to give away too much of the book in the blurb because then why read the book, but then you don't want to be cagey about it because if I don't give you some tasty morsels, then you're not going to open it up or download it. So there's that delicate tightrope. I think you've walked it really well. I think you've kind of laid out a really compelling problem that people are going to want to see through to the finish.
Well, thank you.
So let's talk about the writing process. I'm always interested in that because I have zero experience writing a book-length work. I've published short stories and essays, but I've attempted and failed numerous times to write a novel. So first of all, how long is your book? Just for context for our listeners, how many words is your book?
Let's see. I believe the final is about 78,000. It went through lots of different versions, so I just had to think about that for a second.
No, that's
just
fair.
Under 80,000. Yeah.
All right, so about 80,000 words. And how long did it take you to write from when you really said, I am writing a novel, until you were able to sort of get that work finished and ready for publication?
Yeah, gosh. Well, the total journey was about 6.5 years. And I can sort of tell you the different stages along the way, but just also to, remember that. I mean, this was my very first novel. And like you, I had never written a book before, and I was very naive about the process. And so, but it was really the book of my heart. So I stuck with it. And I can see why some writers put that first book aside and start fresh on something new. And in some ways, I started fresh on this book like several times throughout those 6 years.
Right.
And also, of course, I have a day job, and so I'm not writing every day. And so it was a much longer journey than I ever thought it would be, but I, learned a lot about writing along the way.
It's exciting because I know a lot of people are up against the sort of, how do I balance my work and my life and my desire to write? And Tim and I actually have a whole episode on that, ironically. But yeah, I'd love to hear about your journey. I mean, you're a physician. I assume you're full-time working, healing people, probably doing research papers, I would imagine. Like, how'd you find the time to write?
Yeah, well, so I actually do work part-time, which means I work about 4 days a week. I mean, there's always, up and down with that. Like sometimes I'm doing things even on my non-work days, but I did scale back some years ago, which was just really what I needed to do to be able to keep going in medicine. And so that does give me 3 days a week to write. My kids are older, teens now, they're all teenagers. So, they usually sleep in on the weekend. So I usually can write like on weekend mornings. There's weeks where I write a lot of words, and then there's weeks where I don't write at all. Like I'm actually kind of going through a little writing slump recently, which has been hard, but I've just had too much else going on with my life. And I just have to remember like to take like the big picture view, and because it's actually been kind of like driving me crazy. Like I haven't written anything in a couple of weeks. But then I just remind myself like, hey, in the grand scheme of things, it's okay to take a couple of weeks off. I mean, I know there are writers out there who would just maybe gasp at that, like that are really of the school of like, write every day, even if it's just, 500 words, but that's just not realistic for me.
That is, I'm right there with you. So I have to ask, like, if you have a big break, sometimes if I'm working on a longer piece, one of the things that I've struggled with is, it's very easy for me to be like, all right. And I'm only talking about like, some short stories. So maybe like 2 to 5,000 words, where I'm kind of like, well, I lost the thread on that one. I guess I'll just throw it in the drawer and maybe I'll go back to it. When you had an expansive time where you weren't writing, what brought you back into it? How did you keep this sort of broader idea of your work in your head so that you could return to it? Or was it a struggle?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that helps me, and it's also been really helpful to hear, either on other podcasts or, read other interviews, that my brain isn't the only one that does this, but there's always like a little part of my brain that's thinking about it. And like, I keep a lot of different threads going just on my phone, on my notes app. And like, I'll get as I get little things that come to mind, like during the day, like, during my day job, or unfortunately my brain tends to do this like in the middle of the night. I just like will put it in my notes app. Like I have short story ideas, and then I have like one for my work in progress, and then I have just probably other random ones that would make no sense to anyone else looking at it. So I think like that, I've heard other people say like that counts as writing, like your brain just like ruminating on it. It's and sometimes I realize like my brain needs to do that. And then all of a sudden after a few weeks, like I'll be inspired to actually like get the words on the page or on the screen.
I have the same set of subfolders in my phone. as well.
Awesome.
And it's so liberating to be able, because you need to capture that kind of flash of inspiration.
Yeah.
Because we've talked about it on previous shows, where if you kind of just say, oh, well, I'll get to that when I get home, that's a great idea. I'm not going to forget that one. That's going to be awesome. By the time you get home, you're done, right? You're probably worn out from the day, and you certainly lost that moment of inspiration. So if you kind of capture that in your phone, at least you have a record of it, so you can go back to it and go, what was I thinking? Oh, right. And then maybe write it when you have the time. Yeah.
It's so true. It's like the ones you think, oh, I'll remember that in the morning, but you won't if you don't put it in your phone. But then, of course, the best ones are the ones where you look at it in the morning and you're like, what?
Yes, you're like, oh, I can't wait to have this moment of genius be revisited. And you're like, why did I write Don Johnson in my notes before I went to bed last night?
Yeah, some of them are pretty funny.
So that brings me to a question about really your writing background. So some folks out there might be thinking, well, gosh, I have a yearning, I have a phone, I can make notes. Well, let me go be a novelist. And I think that is attainable for folks who are willing to put in the work. You said you worked on this book for about six and a half years, and I'm very surprised by that. And I think it's wonderful that you have that kind of staying power, and also that you were prescient enough to write about something that really is very topical right now, with artificial intelligence kind of hitting the way it's hitting. I know it's been around for a while, but as far as the news coverage and whatnot, it's very prevalent. So, what kind of writing background did you have that emboldened you to think, yeah, I can do this?
Yeah, I will say I was just very naive, which in a way I'm glad I was, because I think if I truly knew how much work it would be, I wouldn't have started. To be honest, I'm sure a lot of people have said that. But to answer your question, I mean, my main writing background was academic, and I'm no longer in academics. I'm in a rural community practice, but medical career pretty much for all of us, starts out in academics. So before I got into fiction writing, probably about like 7-8 years ago, was when I went through this experience with burnout with being a physician. And I started writing narrative medicine essays. The first time I did it, the feedback I got was just so incredible from colleagues and, people even like from other countries, like emailing me like, thank you for writing this essay. And so that feedback was very encouraging. Like, hey, like, not only is this helpful for me, but like it's helpful for other people to see their experience, in someone else's writing. And so I wrote a lot of personal essays, both like in like medical journals, and then also I got into blogging. I had a couple like big medical platforms reach out to me and ask me to blog for them. People talk about the muse, but I just got this story idea for this book, and I was like, this could be fun. I'm going to write a book. And it kind of went from there.
That's great. No, that's great. I mean, it's got to be at some level, it's got to be fun, right?
Yeah.
The writing style of your book is very, it's not academic, right? It's very well researched. Obviously, you know what you're talking about, but it is, really an engaging kind of informal, that is, I think, just perfect for kind of a commercial thriller, and I think you struck a really nice balance in not diving too far into jargon, but really having a potentially complex topic that you're proposing in very simple language.
No, thank you for that. I love that feedback. Yeah, I do think that's also, what I was striving for. And I think the way that, sort of connects just with the other parts of my life is like one of the things just in my practice I've always tried to do with my patients is just to like, put things in plain language and not use a lot of jargon. And there have been a lot of reviews that have said similar things, which has been really rewarding. And I know you're not supposed to read your reviews, but I mean, I think most of us can't help but peek at them once in a while.
Yeah.
And I think and just to show like all writing is subjective, like most of the reviews have been along the lines of what you said, but there was one review that said something like, like it was like condescending and like a doctor lording their knowledge over people. And I was like, oh gosh, that's not what I had intended at all. But I think it just goes to show that, every reader brings their own experience to the book. And I thought, well, if like 9 out of 10 reviews say this one thing and 1 out of 10 says the other, I think I can live with that. So
yeah, 4 out of 5 dentists recommend you're going to chew the gum for sure.
Yeah.
Some people like to be the smartest person in the room, and they might feel threatened by a book that makes them feel like they're not the smartest person in the room. So that's always another possibility. But no, I didn't get that at all. I thought it was very smooth and very very straightforward. I was pleased by it. So as far as how you approach the work, one of the things that Tim and I like to ask writers is whether they are plotters or pantsers, right? I'm not sure if you're familiar with the terminology, but the whole, did you have to have the outline up front? Did you just start? I experience it as a range, like somewhere. So where are you on that range of plotter to pantser?
Yeah, I am also in the middle. I would say leaning more toward pantsing in the sense that I have to discover the story as I write it. And I think that's also why the book took me so long, right? Because some of those early drafts were discovering the story, and some people do that by outlining, right? So I will say also, again, I was just so naive. Like, I didn't know much about story structure when I first started. I do think because, I'm a huge bookworm. I've been a bookworm since I was a little kid. Like, I read all the time. Like, I think through that, like, I had just, absorbed through osmosis, like sort of a sense of story structure, but I didn't know much about it. And so after I finished the first draft and then started researching, like, well, now what do I do? and so I discovered story structure, and I love story structure because I think there's kind of like a science to it. It's like a science and an art, but I loved that it, helped give me these like goalposts. And so then I went back and applied that to my story when I revised. And so, and like then my second book that I wrote after that, where I knew a little bit more, like I had a sense of like, okay, like, the goalposts, like, what some people call the first plot point and the midpoint and the dark night of the soul in this. But, like in between, I don't outline. I just write. I just pants it. And then also for both books, like, I did not know the ending until I know some people say like they can't write unless they know the ending, but I have to write the book to discover the ending. I don't know. I'd be curious to hear where both of you are in that.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I love the act of exploring and the world building at the beginning of the book, at the beginning of any piece that I'm writing. And then sort of I'd say maybe once every 2 times or perhaps 2,000 times, I'm very pleasantly surprised how it actually ends. So yeah, I love that. I love being able to discover what the ending is going to be. A lot of times when I was younger, I had the ending in my head, but I was very like pretentious because I was younger and stupider. And it was like, oh man, wouldn't it be great if a short story ended blah, 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 blah. And then I would try to write that and I just couldn't. So I love being on the other end of it now and just writing because it's a lot of fun. And then finding a spot where it's like, that would be a very nice, compelling ending. I just wish it happened more.
Yeah.
On my end, I used to think that I had to know the entire movement from start to finish before I could begin. And over the course of the first season of our podcast, what I discovered was that was an elegant and effective way of procrastinating. So I'm trying a new approach now, and it is paying off, where I do much more of what you're describing, the pantsing, because the act of discovery is where the fun is for me. Now, I also like editing, like I really unhealthy like editing, so what I used to do is I would sort of write something and get maybe a third of the way through and go, oh, I want to make the first third pretty. And I would stop writing, go back and start editing, and it would kill the momentum of the entire piece to the point where I wouldn't be able to finish it. So happy to say gotten through that. So yeah, we're all learning about the journey. But it sounds like, the commitment of 6.5 years working on your book, getting it to a point where it's published. I mean, first of all, kudos, very commendable. And the staying power, very impressive. But you've got 2 books. So The Algorithm Will See You Now is your first novel. It's out. And the new one, The Committee Will Kill You Now, is out in November. So did you write these back to back while one was sort of being shopped around? You started writing the other one?
Yes. Yeah, that's exactly it. So even though, I mean, the journey for the first one was like 6.5 years, like, I mean, I did take long breaks from it. And so, yeah, so I started writing it at the end of 2016. And then in fall of 2019, I applied to the Pitch Wars mentoring program with it. Like never thinking I had, any sort of chance. And then, I mean, amazingly, it got selected, and that was, I mean, really a huge help in my journey. I mean, I was at the point where I honestly felt like, because I had started querying it and was getting, just like rejection after rejection, and so I was pretty much ready to just give up. And so then Pitch Wars, for people who don't know, it is no longer happening, but it went, I think, for about 10 years total, where basically you're paired with a mentor, either an author or someone in the publishing industry, and you have 3 months to revise your manuscript. And then there was an online showcase where agents could, say if they liked it or not and request your materials. And big success stories are, a lot of people then come out of that with an agent, which I didn't, which was totally okay. Because the amazing part of it was I met with other writers and still connected with those people today who have become like my writing friends and beta readers and critique partners. And before that, I really was not involved in the writing community because I was, again, I was working my day job as a physician and sort of writing at night on the weekends, and kind of like, who do I talk to about what I'm doing here? And so, the Pitch Wars, community, like meeting other writers, was so huge for me. And then the irony, well, I mean, of course, for all of us, was that, so the showcase for our group was in February 2020. And then, of course, we were in the pandemic in March of 2020. And like, who wants to publish a medical thriller right now,
Yeah.
So I just shelved it. And then everyone says the, best, remedy for sort of like the grief you have about like having to shelve a manuscript is to write the next book. So I started writing the next book, and it was, it was like a distraction from that. And then it was also, it was like my pandemic distraction. Like, and this is the only time I've ever done this. Like I drafted it as part of Camp NaNoWriMo in April 2020. So that's, where you try to write like a 1,000 or a little bit more words a day. And I don't think I quite got to the 50,000 goal, but it gave me a good chunk to start. And so then that book I wrote, really over the next 3 years. And I kind of actually went back and forth between the two. So it was a long process for both of them.
One thing I wanted to ask you was about the process of getting the book published. So you're working with Black Rose Writing Press. And when I looked them up, I saw mixed reviews, and I couldn't figure out if they were a vanity press or just a small indie press. Tell us about your experience with Black Rose Writing Press. How's that gone so far?
Yeah, it's been going great so far. And so I found them basically just by, searching online for indie publishers. And I had queried The Algorithm Will See You Now like at least 3 separate times over the years. So before Pitch Wars, and then as part of the Pitch Wars showcase process. And then, so then after I shelved it after that, basically then again in 2022, I just kept coming back to, like, of course we all love our own stories, but I was just like, I really love this story. I feel like this book has something to say, and I really want to get it out in the world. And so I started exploring a small press as a way to do that. And so I started querying small presses and actually got several requests. And then when Black Rose offered, I decided to take that offer and withdrew from the others. So when I was researching Black Rose, I did find also those online reviews. And it did appear to me that when they first were in business, I guess, I don't know if I'm using the right term, but that there was a clause in the contract where they did require authors to purchase a certain number of their books. So I was really kind of tuned into that to, make sure that that was not a part of my contract, and it was not. And I also reached out to other writers with Black Rose, and they had all had a positive experience. And then I did also hire an attorney with experience with book contracts to review my contract, just to make sure I wasn't getting myself into something that I wouldn't have the knowledge to recognize.
Yeah.
So I've seen some people say they're a vanity press, but I mean, a vanity press means that the author pays the press to publish their book, and that is not the case with Black Rose. So authors don't pay to publish with them.
Yeah, and that's how I understood it as well.
Yeah,
and that's why I'm really excited to hear that kind of firsthand experience from you, because it really was two completely different stories about the same, publishing house, and I couldn't figure out which one was correct.
Yeah. And again, I mean, I don't have any way to corroborate or dispute what was happening some years ago. So I don't know if maybe there was something going on some years ago, but the current situation, and every other author I've talked with at Black Rose, has not had that experience. So
yeah. So far, the authors we've had come on have worked with larger publishing houses like Simon & Schuster, but I'm really interested in the small indie press, because I feel like that kind of curation of the content, you can really kind of love a book and really take your time with it and put out something that is true to your vision, rather than maybe pivot purely to the commercial potential of it. Is that fair to say? I
think it is. And the other thing, and you kind of brought this up a little while ago, is that I wanted to get it out in the world, because I knew, being in medicine and knowing what was going on with AI in medicine, I knew this was all coming, and that's what really inspired me to write the book. And so, I thought, even if I kept querying and got an agent, and, then it has to go on sub, and then there's no guarantee. And then even if you get an offer from a big house, it can take 1 to 2 years from that offer to even be out in the world. And, I thought, this book needs to be out in the world now. I just, again, had this, and again, I can't explain it, just this drive to get this story out in the world. And so I actually am really happy with that decision, because even though, and we can talk more about this, but I've learned the marketing is really hard when you're with a small press, because the marketing really falls on the author. But I think more and more that's happening for all authors nowadays. But, I'm just happy that, my little book is out in the world, and I feel like it's the right time for it to be there. And so, that's just really what I wanted. So
yeah, and you actually, the way that you came into our field of view was through a PR rep who had reached out to us and said, here's a great book. We'd love to see if you'd like to have him on the show. And we kind of read the package and went, well, yeah, that sounds great. So you hired the PR person, or was that a person attached to Black Rose Writing?
Yeah. So that person was actually through was called a blog tour and podcast tour. So through a group called Women on Writing. And so what these services do is, and I mean, you do pay a fee as the author, but they help do the legwork. So they help get you like on blogs, like as either guest post or interview or review, and then like you said, like contacting on the author's behalf some podcasters, and so that is something that I paid as the author. And I think this is maybe where some confusion comes up with like Vanity Press is that yes, authors with small presses are paying for marketing, but the more and more I talk to other writers, like that is happening with authors at large presses too. Like unless you're like their, superstar of the year that they've decided to put all their, marketing dollars into, like you're probably going to have to do some of your own marketing. Like I was talking with a friend who, also happens to be a podcaster with a writing show. And she was saying that like some of the big authors she's talked to have just shared like, oh yeah, they pay for their own Facebook ads, like they run their own Amazon ads, like even when they're with big publishers. And so I just want to be really transparent about that, because I think, like the idea that like once you get a publisher, whether it's small or large, that, you're not going to have to do any marketing is really naive. And that, unfortunately, that means not only your own time, but investing, your own dollars in it too, which is really hard. And, I am still learning. I mean, the book's only been out 3 months. So I've just, kind of started with small things, but like this, like blog tour and podcasting tour, I thought was a good investment. And again, I just want to be totally transparent. It was a couple $100s. But I think I got like a dozen different blogs and then like 6 podcasts. And so I felt like, well, I think that's a pretty good investment. And it's not, I'm not, it's not like paying like thousands of dollars or something like that. So I just, to be transparent.
So no, I completely agree that there is no shame in putting your own money into promoting your book. I mean, if you're going to spend 6.5 years writing something, you spend a little bit of money to let people know it's out there. And other authors that we've had on the show have said that as well. So they were with those bigger houses, and it was, I don't know, maybe 8 years ago, the one that I'm thinking of that he was with them. But yeah, he said he would go out on his own readings and kind of, they might cover the cost of the, or split the hotel and the travel with him, or, he was definitely coming out of pocket to promote the book, on his own time and his own dime. So that does seem to be the norm now.
Yeah.
And the social media aspect, what is your engagement there? I mean, I feel like, I don't want to say anything out of that, but we seem to not be of the TikTok generation. What is your engagement social media wise? Do you try and build the community? You mentioned that you have you've built a pretty great community of beta readers and folks that are in your reading groups, but have you built one online as well?
Yeah, I would say I'm not great at social media, but I try. So the really difficult thing for me is that, my main platform was Twitter, and I did invest a lot of time in building up my Twitter connections. Like all my Twitter connections were like genuine connections, like not, just like follow for follow or things like this. And I think the writing community on Twitter was amazing. And, I did make the decision recently. And so that was super hard because, I had really just, like, I don't know if you both are on Twitter, but like, the writing community is so great. Like you see other writers post like, it's my book birthday, my book is out today, or, all that. And I had looked forward to that for so long. And then by the time it happened, like the platform was just, not what it was anymore. And so, so yeah, I'm figuring that out. So now that I'm not on Twitter, like that was the main place I interacted. So I am on Mastodon, which, actually I love. And I actually think I've probably sold more books on Mastodon than I did ever on Twitter anyway. Like it's been amazing, like all the genuine connections there. And there's like a big, sci-fi community on there that I love. I mean, it kind of has a geeky vibe, which is like perfect for me. So, I've had like great, conversations on there about, AI and writing and sci-fi. And like, there's been people who have like messaged me like that, like they discovered my book on there and they're going to read it. And so, so I'm loving that platform. I've never been on Facebook socially. But when the book was put, I did create an author site just because everybody said that's what you should do. So I know I'm like a dinosaur. I'm like learning how to navigate Facebook. And so yeah, social media for me is hard. And so right now I think like I'm kind of focusing most of my attention on Mastodon because it just feels more natural to me. And yeah, I have not gone on TikTok. TikTok like scares me.
I
So
I love TikTok. Like I watch so many videos of people cleaning watches on TikTok. But then when it comes to the fact that I have all these friends on TikTok, I'm sort of like, well, maybe I should try and make one. And I'm like, I don't even know where to begin. And I think that's where it is. And so it's so strange because, when you think of social media, I think it's whatever the big hot thing is. Like Twitter has been so dominating, but yes, to say that it isn't the same platform that it was is a huge understatement. I mean, it's just such a tragedy, but it just goes to show also that if you do build the communities, having something on Mastodon, I do believe I have Mastodon somewhere on my phone, but I haven't looked into it. But to hear that you've had some success on it, it's like, oh, maybe that's great. So I think it's wonderful that there are myriad ways that you can reach people through social media if you want to. I'm always worried that I'm going to sound in any Twitter or social media conversation, it's like, that my purpose isn't there to build the community. It's to sort of, hawk my latest publication or something like that. So it's great that you found an outlet and are finding places to have that engagement.
it sounds a lot harder than it is. Like trust me, if like if someone like me, like in their late 40s, who has not ever been like a big social media person, can figure it out, like, anyone can figure it out. So
It's so fun that we're talking about social media and whatnot, and your book is about artificial intelligence, right?
Yeah,
And
I
you're
know,
like,
I know.
social. I'm curious. I mean, as a speculative novel about artificial intelligence, what is your book asking us to consider about the future of AI?
Ooh, I love that question. I would say, like, in a nutshell, it's asking people to think about, could the problems arise from the technology or the humans behind the technology? That's kind of the big question I'm asking people to think about. Like, whose hands do we want to put this technology in? Whose hands does this technology already lie in? That's the thing that I'm asking the readers to think on.
That's a great question, because when we see AI start to hallucinate, that sends chills. I was just having a conversation with some friends who said, yeah, have you ever seen AI generate a video, like a commercial for a pizza place or whatever? And he said, it's horrifying. It's nightmare inducing because the software doesn't understand how hands work. And so it's just kind of capturing whatever images it has, but then sort of juxtaposing them together in a way that doesn't make physiological sense, and it's horrifying. So yeah, I don't know if I want that in charge of my healthcare.
Yeah, and I've written about this for some blog posts, like when people have asked, like, how did I write this, or how, what inspired me. And so I've shared, so basically, like the past decade, like in the 2010s, and like this is something I was aware of being an oncologist. So I'm a cancer medicine physician. That so Watson Health, there was this huge thing in the 2010s that like Watson Health was going to be this huge tool for us in cancer medicine. And the long and the short of it is it failed spectacularly. and it was kind of like, just, I was just very curious and interested in it. So I was like following that story. And then when it kind of just disappeared, I started like looking into like what happened. And then at the same time, just, as my career went on in medicine and just the lived experience of the pressures of working in a system where most of us are there to try to help people, but we're constantly pressured by, the corporate mindset, like just sort of like all these things coming together. I thought like, what's going to really happen with AI, in the hands of like the people who are running healthcare these days. And then I started reading more about machine learning because again, I was just curious and read about this concept of like a machine learner hallucinating if it comes across something that its data can't explain. And so that again, I like touch on in my book, and I touch on it pretty early on in the book. So I don't think this is a big spoiler or anything, but basically like that, like was one of the first thoughts that went in my mind was like, how could we ever trust a system that could just make something up? Like, and then it's been so like wild to me that like, so the book was published March 2nd this year, and like all this explosion with the different, chat. We're already in the next version of Chat GPT, right? It went from 3 to 4, and then we've got the Bing one, and like it just, it's not going to like hit the New York Times list or anything like that, but just to, have a few people out in the world appreciate it and know that it's out there at the right time is like rewarding to me. So
this is such a fascinating story. I really love it. Now that with the book, the first book having been finished and out, and then you had the second book, how did it come about?
Yeah, so it was really, again, like I started writing it like pretty much right after I shelved the first one back in early 2020. So it was,
right.
It's a prequel to the first book. So it actually goes back to the 1990s and tells the story. So it's kind of like I call it like the villain origin story of my antagonist in the first book. It like goes back to her years as a young physician. And it's told in the viewpoint of one of the other characters who's like a mentor character in the first book. So in the first book, they're physicians in their 60s. And so I go back and tell the story of when they were in their 20s, and sort of story of the harms of medical training, especially before there were any work hour restrictions, and sort of that darker side of healthcare and what happens to trainees, and how two people might come out of that in very different pathways. And I also wound into it like something I just came across randomly in some research I was doing of this fascinating story of the rationing of the first medical dialysis in the 1960s in Seattle. So like it's a dual timeline, like the main story is in the 1990s. And then there's a second story that the main character discovers through journals of his father of this, really gets into like medical ethics of this thing that happened in the 1960s that even as a physician myself, I actually, was not aware of it until I did this book research. So it's like a real deep dive, but it was so much fun to write because I got to write about these things that really fascinate me, but I also got to like, go into these, the background of these two characters that I had just like hinted that they had this past relationship, like in the first book. And then and it's like we were talking about pantsing, like, I don't even know where that came from. Like, I was just like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if like these two had some history? And, it just like adds more layers to the characters. And then, but at the time I never knew like, okay, and then I'm going to go into this deep dive and write a whole second book about it.
Yeah.
So that to me is just like the fun of writing though. And I know like non-writers, it probably sounds crazy because it's like, you're making up these characters, right? Like they're not like, but it feels like we're discovering them, right? Like, so it's so much fun to talk with other writers about this and who get what you're saying and like, you're not crazy. Like this is what we all do.
Yeah, they have to be internally consistent, right? And if you allow them to reveal to you who they are, then it becomes a lot easier to keep them in their lane and let them do things that are plausible and interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
So your book's coming out in November 2023. The Committee Will Kill You Now, your second book. Is that through Black Rose as well?
It is. So basically, after the first book had its publication date and we had kind of, finalized the manuscript and the cover and all these things you have to do, then they asked if I had a second book. And it's like that thing, we all dream of, like, oh, funny you should ask. Like, I do have a second book. And so one of the things I've said on some other podcasts is, just, if you're out there writing and, like me, like you're writing for years, like don't give up. Like if you have more than one book and you've been writing for years, like then, once you publish the first one, whether it's, through a small press like this or whether it's with an agent, like, you might actually get a contract for your next book too. Like if you have, if you have more than one that are ready. So yeah, so that's the only reason they're coming out. Well, I guess it's not quite 6 months apart. It's about 8 months apart. But yeah, it's funny. I think for non-writers, they're like, oh, you wrote another book in just a couple months. It's like, oh, no. Like this has been like this one I started writing 3 years ago. So
yeah, and that was my on the surface assumption, is that you had sort of cranked it out in record time, and I'm like, wow, how in the world? But yeah, no, it makes much more sense the way you've described it.
Yeah, and I think there are probably some full-time writers who could do that, right? Like I know it's like some indie writers, that are full-time, doing it and making money from it and that, supporting themselves. Like they maybe are able to do that, but no, not me.
Yeah, those jerks with their full-time writing. I got bills to pay.
Well, this has been a lot of fun. Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah.
Hope you enjoyed your time on the Tiffin Writing Workshop. Thank you again for coming.
Thank you for having me. It was so much fun. I really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you again.
Yeah, thank you so very much. It was really nice to meet you.